Witches leave behind more than just cauldrons, and some of their relics carry bits of their spirits as well. So for starters today, what appears to the innocent eye as nothing but a fence stake, perhaps left over from a construction project of sorts, holds a history of sadness and evil doing. Possibly being the oldest item that I'll talk about today, the history of this stake dates back to its use in the 1700s. While the name of the witch it belonged to has been lost to time, the spike was originally used in a black mass ritual in an attempt to summon Satan himself to this world. Now the witch we're speaking of had attempted to curse the stake over the course of her pregnancy, hoping that it would become strong enough to take the soul of her womb in exchange for the devil. So during the ritual, she plunged the stake into the flesh as a sacrifice. But while it strengthened her relationship with Satan, it did not succeed in bringing him to Earth. So the stake was passed down as a family heirloom, bringing a feeling of longing and sadness to any that held it. Until it was finally acquired by the Warrens. Yep, Ed and Lorraine came into possession of this spike, and its story was told in The Demonologist, a book penned by Gerald Daniel Brittle about the Warrens' career, and some of the more rare items in their museum. It's quite a fascinating reference book, especially since it came out way before the Warrens were synonymous with Hollywood demonic. So the last I heard about this spike was that it was being held in the Warren Museum, but when you know that the Warren Museum is technically closed, I wonder if any vandals break in, like what damage they could do with something that looks so unassuming but is so dangerous. Also, with my knowledge of how the Warren son-in-law, Tony Spera, is playing around with the artifacts, I'm a little bit worried that this unassuming spike could wind up back in the hands of some fool and cause a lot more harm in the world. A witch's talisman contains a number square and non-standard English words. It is believed that it may incorporate names of angels, demons, elementals, or worse. This one in particular was reported to have been used by a witch, and it's uncertain what the main purpose of this talisman would have been. Look, a talisman can be defined as an object believed to have magic powers, or hey, maybe it can bring good luck. They come in all shapes and sizes. This one in particular was found in a cottage. Contrary to popular belief, most talismans are not worn, even though there is evidence that some folks did wear them around their necks. They're often carried about in pockets, purses, however you carry things. And usually they are kept near the person or object that they are supposed to protect. So if we're going to travel over to Wiltshire, they have their fair share of witchcraft stories. There have been multiple folks across the county that have been accused and found guilty of being a witch. Interestingly enough, Oaksea Village Pub was rumored to have witch crosses as decoration to just ward off demons. Gotta protect yourself, folks. Why did they start in the first place? Well, there's quite a few theories as to why the European witch hunting craze happened, such as Catholicism and Protestants vying for dominance, and the Little Ice Age that caused widespread loss of crops and livestock that resulted in sickness and starvation. These witch hunts were further fueled by greedy and really evil and unethical witch hunters, who stood to make considerable financial gains from finding and killing so-called witches in large numbers. European witch hunts were good examples of icky localized power, used for bad instead of good. There were a lot of incidents of witch trials in Europe that happened under the jurisdiction of village authorities, where justice was just sort of handed out by local judges and priests. Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium, and the Netherlands saw the greatest number of prosecutions for witchcraft. The Catholic countries of Italy, Spain, and Portugal had fewer prosecutions. The height of the German witch frenzy was marked by the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, a book that became the handbook for witch hunters and inquisitors. Written in 1486 by Dominicans Henricius Instructorus and Jacobus Brenge, and first published in Germany in 1487, the main purpose of this was to systematically refute arguments claiming that witchcraft did not exist. The last official witch trial may have taken place in Poland in 1775, even though there are some conflicting records around this. It allegedly began after members of the community asked officials in a neighboring village to investigate evidence of sorcery. 14 women were arrested after being accused of using magic to harm the wife of a local nobleman. 3 of these women died after being tormented, with the remaining folks being burned at the stake. This witch trial is credited by historians as being the beginning of the Polish government's 1776 ban on torment and witch trials. Why did they end? Well, various political factors which historians have identified as contributing to the end of the European witch hunting craze. There are various political factors which historians have identified as contributing to the European witch hunting craze, such as the 30 Years' War, and when these eventually came to an end, they ended a period of political instability. Intellectual factors also helped bring the European witch hunts to an end, with the Enlightenment encouraging people to take a more rational approach to the concept of witchcraft and to reject superstition. Advances in science meant that moles and birthmarks could be explained as a normal part of human physiology. Thankfully, many European countries began to issue laws that abolished the hunting of witches. Essentially, when there was stable government and economic security, paranoia surrounding witchcraft declined. But as witch hysteria decreased in Europe, it grew in the New World, which was reeling from the wars between the French and British, all the chaos around smallpox, and the ongoing fear of attacks from, well, everybody. The tense atmosphere was ripe for finding scapegoats. Probably the best known witch trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. These trials began when Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams began suffering from fits, body contortions, uncontrolled screaming. As more and more young women began to exhibit symptoms, mass hysteria ensued, and 3 women were accused of witchcraft: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, an enslaved woman owned by Parris's father. She confessed to being a witch, and she began accusing others of using black magic. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop became the first accused witch to be put to death during the Salem witch trials when she went the way of the rope necklace at the gallows. Ultimately, around 150 people were accused and 18 were put to death. Massachusetts wasn't the first of the 13 colonies to obsess about witches, though. In terms of witch hunts in the United States, witchcraft was one of the 12 capital crimes decreed by Connecticut's colonial government back in 1642. It was in Hartford, 30 years before the infamous Salem witch trials, that a witch hunt hysteria took hold, resulting in 7 trials and 4 lives ended. In Windsor, Connecticut, in 1647, Elsie Young was the first person in America who lost their lives for witchcraft. Before Connecticut's final witch trial took place in 1697, 46 people were accused of witchcraft in that state, and 11 were put to death to the crime. The legal precedent cited by devoutly Puritan colonists was of a divinely higher order. Biblical passages, such as Exodus 22:18 and also Leviticus 20:27, came into hand. Magic. It's a skill or a power that's been around as long as anybody can trace, and back in the day, it used to be something to be persecuted for. Nowadays, not so much, or I'd be a little more worried about the company I keep. I'm friends with folks who go by like Mysterion the Mind Reader, and then there's Papa Jimbo, another famed magician. Look, I also dabble in the art, but I'm not nearly as good at it. I feel like today is as good a time as any to jump into its history, so let me know the names of any magicians you can think of in the comments, and let's see if they make my list. How about we start off with William II de Soules. In 1320, he was involved in a conspiracy against King Robert along with Sir David, Lord of Brecon. Some say that William wanted the Scottish throne for himself. Others say the goal was to place Edward on the Scottish throne. Nevertheless, he had gathered a couple of followers when he was arrested because you can't overthrow royalty. He was brought before a specially convened session of Parliament on August 4th of 1320, and that's where he confessed his treason. The Parliament found him pretty guilty, he forfeited his title, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Hey look, dude got off easy. His conspirators fared much worse. They were drawn behind horses, went the way of the rope necklace, and lost their heads. William is said to have died by April of 1321 under some mysterious circumstances. A lot of folklore maintains that he was involved with the black arts after being schooled with Michael Scott, the Wizard of the North. Don't worry, I'll talk about him next. William is also said to have defeated the Northumbrian giant, the Count O'Kilder. I tried, folks! I'm not Scottish! The giant wore an enchanted armor that was impervious to any weapon, but the wizard tricked the giant by knocking him into a river where he, well, met his end. The water is known as the How You Met Your End by the Water pool today. I can't say the D word, okay? Work with me here. Alrighty, as promised, time to discuss Michael Scott. Technically speaking, he was a Scottish mathematician and scholar in the Middle Ages. The legendary man used to feast with his friends with dishes brought by spirits from the royal kitchens of France and Spain and other lands. He is said to have turned to stone a coven of witches, which had become the stone circle of Long Meg and her daughters in Cumbria. Scott's reputation as a magician had already become fixed in the age immediately following his own. He appears in Dante's Divine Comedy, the only Scott to do so mind you, and the 4th Bogia located in the 8th Circle of Hell, reserved for sorcerers, astrologers, and similar folks. He is described by Dante as being spare in the flank. While some argue that this is the sole extant description of his physical appearance, others think that the description is more poetic. Scott also had a particular reputation for his ability to predict the future, which is a scary skill to have, dude. Time to move on over to the Count of Saint Germaine, who was a European adventurer who achieved prominence in European high society of the mid-18th century due to his interest and achievements in science, alchemy, philosophy, and the arts. Nice little mix there. Saint Germain used a wide variety of names and titles, including the Marquis de Montferrat, Comte Bellamare, Chevalier Showing, Count Weldon, Comte Soltikoff, Manuel Doria, and others that I cannot pronounce. His real name and specifics about his birth and background are a little murky. He is said to have made claims about being 500 years old, leading Voltaire to dub him the Wonder Man, and that he is a man who does not die and who knows everything. Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel is recorded as having called him one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. Many groups honor Saint Germain as a supernatural being called a Master of the Ancient Wisdom or an Ascended Master. In the Ascended Master teachings, he's referred to simply as Saint Germaine or as the Ascended Master Saint Germaine, which is a mouthful. As an Ascended Master, Germaine is believed to have many magical powers, such as the ability to teleport, levitate, walk through walls, and to inspire people by telepathy, among others. The Theosophical Society, which I'm going to mention a lot today, considered him to be a Mahatma, Master of Ancient Wisdom, or Adept. Helena Blavatsky said that he was one of her Masters of Wisdom, and hinted that he had given her some secret documents. Some esoteric groups credit him with inspiring the Founding Fathers to draft the United States Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, as well as providing the design of the Great Seal of the United States. Apparently he's also been reincarnated a couple of times over the years to boot, so quite the legacy. Edward Kelly, also known as Edward Talbot, was an English Renaissance occultist and scryer, who is best known for working with John Dee in his magical investigations. Besides the professed ability to see spirits or angels in a shoe, stone, or mirror, which was very valued, Kelly also said that he possessed the secret of transmuting base metals into gold, the goal of alchemy, as well as the Philosopher's Stone itself. Kelly's angels communicated to him in a special language termed angelical, subsequently called Enochian, which he then relayed to others. Kelly said that angelical was dictated by angels, who he saw, and her by means of scrying in a crystal ball or mirror. He also described the angels as communicating by means of tapping out letters displayed in a rectangular tablet. The first third were tapped out with each angelical word backwards, the following 2/3 with each word forwards. There are no significant errors or discrepancies in word usage between the first and following parts. The English translations were not tapped out, but according to Kelly, appeared on little strips of paper coming out of the angels' mouths. Experts considered the dictation of the angelical material highly important for 3 reasons. Firstly, it was believed that angelical represented a documentable case of true glossolalia, thereby proving Kelly was actually speaking with the angels and not from his imagination. Secondly, the angels communicated that their language was actually the original prototype of Hebrew, the language with which God spoke to Adam, and thus the first human word. Third, the angelical material takes the form of a set of conjurations which would summon an extremely powerful set of angels who would reveal many secrets to those who sought them, especially the key to the Philosopher's Stone, to godlike wisdom and eternal life. Speaking of the Philosopher's Stone, you can't talk about that without bringing up Nicholas Flamel. No, I'm not about to talk about the fictional stuff, folks. I'm personally anti anything to do with the work of J.K. Rowling because of the harm she has caused a lot of people. The real Flamel was a French scribe and manuscript seller. After his death, he developed a reputation as an alchemist, believed to have created and discovered the Philosopher's Stone and to have thereby achieved immortality. John Dee was one of the best known magicians of the 16th century, and it is said he used a specific crystal to tell the future and cure disease. According to his own account, the angel Uriel gave him the crystal, along with a recipe for the Philosopher's Stone. So using crystals in this way was kind of illegal, but Dee got away with it. The specific crystal was later gifted to another alchemist, who stopped trying to use it in 1651 when he believed a demonic god burst out from it, at least according to the Science Museum of London. A witch trapped in a bottle is kind of a form of countermagic. So if a witch was threatening you, the defense? Well, you were gonna create a witch bottle. You were going to attract her and capture her in her evil energy. So these bottles were often filled with rape substances or seawater to, well, off the witch. You'd also use pins and other things to impale them, and herbs to repel them. One analysis of a witch's bottle revealed that it contained urine, iron nails, brass pins, clumps of hair, fingernail clippings, and maybe even belly button lint. So the woman who donated a particular bottle to a museum was like, "They do say there be a witch in it, and if you let it out, there be a lot of trouble." I don't want to do that. I don't need trouble. Bellarmine jugs were named after the Italian Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who wrote anti-Protestant literature to counter the Protestant Reformation. So in 1930, he was canonized as a saint. Now, there is no clear connection between the saint and the jugs, but there's a couple of theories. For starters, some folks thought that naming the jugs after Bellarmine was conceived by Dutch and English Protestants in order to ridicule him. And another one, well, Bellarmine was famously anti-booze. So a bottle and its contents are believed to be used as a counterspell against witchcraft. And there's a lot of other examples of this. Witches' bottles, yeah, we talked about this earlier. So these bottles were found focused around entrances such as fireplaces, doors, beneath the floor, in the walls. Why would you do this? Well, you don't want a witch coming into your house. You don't just protect against vampires, folks. So why did we put iron pins or nails into these bottles? Well, it was believed that iron had magical properties when it came to witches or vampires or all sorts of things. Cursed books. Can't talk about witches without them. The Malleus Maleficarum, translated as the Hammer of Witches, was a book originally written in 1486 by Heinrich Kramer under the name Heinrich Instatoris and Johann Spranger, and this book was considered a key manual for witch hunting. So as for its contents, it claims that women were more prone to witchcraft than men. Because why? Well, according to the authors, women are inferior compared to men. Sure. And according to the author, this would give women the motive to use magic in order to increase their power. The Malleus Maleficarum particularly mentions the presence of witches as midwives, having a chapter referring to them killing their charges or sacrificing them to the devil. Over a 250-year period, it is estimated that between 600,000 to 9 million people were killed worldwide by the Inquisitor's court, and nearly all of those accused were women. Granted, there were some men. We've talked about male witches before. In Europe, 20% of those tried for witchcraft were men. Anyone who didn't really fit the idea of the perfect Christian could easily be branded as a witch, and quite often the accusation was enough to be tried and convicted with little to no evidence. So going back to the book, one copy was published by the Folio Society in 1968 and was donated to the museum by a Mrs. Wheatley of Bratton on the same year. She had inherited the copyrights of the late Mr. Pennethorne Hughes, who wrote the introduction and was the editor of said book. Now, we don't know a lot about Hughes. He is believed to have resided at Southview Cottage in Keyville, Trowbridge, and was a member of the Wiltshire Archaeological and Natural History Society, and he published a book titled Witchcraft in 1952. Pretty apt. Ah, the Conjuring Mirror. No, this has nothing to do with the Hollywood franchise. Originally belonging to a 45-year-old New Jersey man named Oliver Birnbaum, it was used to practice a medieval ritual known as speculum, or mirror magic. He performed a lengthy incantation ritual known as a conjuring formula, inviting the spirit world to assist him in manipulating the future. So when he was first starting to play with magic, Oliver didn't see a lot in the mirror, but the more he concentrated his attention into the mirror, the more control he gained, and the more he could see. So after performing this ritual obsessively for many months, he got to the point where all he had to do was be like, hey, I want to see this, and it would appear. He could tune into the future whenever he wanted. He also had the ability to project people he didn't like into the mirror and single them out for punishment or revenge. So for example, you'd see a victim in a future situation. Oliver would will misfortune to that person, and he'd see it happen just the way he planned it. And while this sounds like a fun way to imagine something, this would actually happen in real life, thanks to inhuman spirits. Now eventually Oliver got to the part where he was so full of himself, he forgot to give homage to Satan, and as a result, the evil he proposed for others began to occur to him, and the spirits he turned loose on his enemies now infested his home. Look, I don't recommend summoning spirits, but if you're gonna do it properly. So after about a week of hell, this man was so terrified that he called some officials in the church and they were like, hey, please send a demonologist. Who did he get? Ed Lorraine Warren. They got there and they're like, oh, doors are opening and closing by themselves, everything's crashing and breaking and smashing. Go figure. So Ed was able to reverse the ritual and bless the house, stopped everything, and when the Warrens were about to take off and go home, Oliver was like, hey, please take the mirror with you. And the 5-foot-tall antique lived in their museum. Oh boy. Witch hunts were a way to punish and kill women pretty easily way back when, and today we're doing a deep dive. The first and last hunts, trials and punishment, and more are all on the docket for your enjoyment. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft, using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many, however, were simply natural healers, or so-called wise women, whose choice of profession was just misunderstood. It's unclear exactly when witches came on the historical scene, but one of the earliest records of a witch is in the Bible, in the book of Samuel I, thought to be written between 931 BC and 721. It tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. The witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's son died in battle, and Saul ended his life. Other Old Testament verses condemn witches, such as the oft-cited Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Additional biblical passages caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. In 1428, the first systematic European witch hunt began in Switzerland. This witch hunt lasted 8 years and resulted in the deaths of 367 people. To be condemned, a person had to have at least 3 neighbors publicly state that they were a witch. The majority of those accused in these witch trials were peasants. These individuals were subjected to all sorts of torment, under which confessions were extracted concerning meetings with the devil, who had supposedly urged the accused to avoid mass and confession in exchange for the ability to fly. Others confessed to having the power to kill their neighbors or to change into werewolves. The condemned were mostly burned to death, with a couple having their heads removed first. Victims were tied to a ladder that was pushed into the fire. As a final mercy, the authorities tied bags of explosives around the witches' necks just to quicken the deaths. Possibly the most famous victim of burning at the stake for witchcraft was none none other than Joan of Arc. However, Joan was not killed during the witch-hunting crazy period. Rather, she was a victim of politics. Witchcraft was just a convenient way to get rid of her. Joan had been subjected by her English captors to 15 examinations, both public and private, before being subjected to a trial in a court, who found her guilty of blasphemy. A translation of her trial record stated that the poison had had a transformative effect, turning her into a member of Satan. It was determined that Joan was a blasphemer against God, and thus she was burnt at the stake in 1431, where it is said she died of smoke inhalation before the flames finally consumed her. One of the biggest European witch hunts took place in Bamberg, Germany from 1626 to 1631. Of the 1,000 people convicted, 900 were burnt at the stake, some of whom were fortunate enough to have lost their heads first. This was one witch hunt that did not discriminate. People of all ages and classes were killed during these witch trials. It all began in 1626, like I mentioned, when people petitioned the local authority, asking why witches and wizards had sent frost to destroy their crops. The Prince Bishop, Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim, launched an investigation, and before long, one woman was arrested and confessed to causing the frost. So how do you identify a lady witch? Well, there were several ways that you could do this, according to the witch hunters of the era. One such sign that a person was a witch was any mark on the skin, such as a mole, an age spot, even a little birthmark. These were seen as a mark of the devil, and one which the witch used to suckle her familiar, which would be a demon that would help them in their evil doing, perhaps disguised as a domestic pet, a cat, a dog. Given that a lot of people have some sort of blemish on their skin, witch hunters were assured of unearthing a witch by using this method. Another common way was to prick them with pins. If the skin didn't break, you didn't have anything poking through, then it was a sure sign they were under the devil's control. So witch hunters used a retractable pin, so once again, you had no hope of passing this test. Early on in specifically European witch hunts, women who were single or elderly were very vulnerable to suspicion. Historians attribute this to patriarchal attitudes. Single women and widows lacked any kind of male protection. Similarly, a woman with a bad temper or a loose mouth was deemed highly suspicious, or if you had any kind of healing power using herbal medicine. Bingo, you're a target. So these legendary accounts first appeared in the 17th century, and according to texts ascribed to Flamel almost 200 years after his death, he had learned alchemical secrets from a Jewish converso on the road to Santiago de Compostela. Flamel had made it his life's work to understand the text of a mysterious 21-page book he had purchased in 1357 at the cost of just 2 florins. Apparently around 1378, he traveled to Spain for assistance with translation. On the way back, he reported that he met a sage who identified Flamel's book as being a copy of the original book of Aberlin the Mage. With this knowledge, over the next couple of years, Flamel and his wife allegedly decoded enough of the book to successfully replicate the recipe for the Philosopher's Stone, producing first silver in 1382 and then gold. I know a lot of miners who would love that right now. Okay, how about I chat about a gal next? Dion Fortune was a British occultist, ceremonial magician, novelist, and author. She was a co-founder of the Fraternity of the Inner Light, an occult organization that promoted philosophies which she claimed had been taught to her by spiritual entities known as the Ascended Masters. As a prolific writer, she produced a large number of articles and books on her occult ideas and also authored 7 novels, several of which expound occult themes. She became interested in esotericism through the teachings of the Theosophical Society, before joining an occult lodge led by Theodore Moriarty and then the Alpha A Omega occult organization. She came to learn that she was being contacted by 2 Ascended Masters and underwent transmediumship to channel the Masters' messages. In 1922, Fortune and Charles Loveday claimed that during one of these ceremonies, they were contacted by the Masters who provided them with a text, the Cosmic Doctrine. Although Fortune became the president of the Christian Mystic Lodge of the Theosophical Society, she believed the society to be uninterested in Christianity and split from it to form the Community of the Inner Light, a group that was later renamed the Fraternity of the Inner Light. With Loveday, she established bases in both Glastonbury and Bayswater in London and began issuing a magazine. She gave public lectures and promoted the growth of the society. During the big global event of the 30s and 40s, you all know which one. She organized a project of meditations and visualizations designed to protect Britain. She began planning for what she believed was a coming post-event Age of Aquarius, although she passed of leukemia shortly after the big event's end. Her novels proved an influence on later occult and modern pagan groups such as Wicca. Alright, time to chat about the famous history folks now, and I might as well start with Rasputin. He was a Russian mystic and a holy man, and is best known for having befriended the imperial family of Nicholas II, the last emperor of Russia, through whom he gained considerable influence influence in the final years of the Russian Empire. I know, it's putting it mildly, but I only have so much time, folks. He was a figure of much debate amongst the royal court, with some describing him as a visionary and a prophet, others a charlatan, others a phony, a fake, a scam artist. Having taken many pilgrimages to holy monasteries, he developed a reputation as a revered holy man, gaining quite the circle of followers who believed in his miracles, and began leading a lot of private prayer meetings, much to the scorn and suspicion of a lot of villagers and priests. It was rumored that specifically female followers were ceremonially washing him before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that they had joined a religious sect whose rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and group pleasure events. Oh, another classic name, Merlin. Technically, depending on who you ask, he's a mythical figure who is best known as a magician, but he's a key enough part of history. The familiar depiction, based on an amalgamation of historic and legendary figures, was introduced by the 12th century British pseudo-history author Geoffrey of Monmouth, and then was built on by the French poet Robert de Boron and their prose successors in the 13th century. This brings me to another famous fictitious name, Morgan Le Fay. She was a powerful and ambiguous enchantress from the legend of King Arthur, and most often a sibling. Early appearances of Morgan in Arthurian literature do not elaborate her character beyond her role as a goddess, a fae, a witch, or a sorceress, generally benevolent and connected to Arthur as his magical savior and protector. Her prominence increased, as did the legend of Arthur, over time, and her moral ambivalence kinda came to be. In a lot of texts, there is an evolutionary transformation of her to an antagonist, which that's a little more popular. Okay, I suppose I could end today with a more modern, real magician, and that's Harry Houdini. He was a Hungarian-American escape artist, illusionist, and stunt performer, mostly recognized for his escape acts. His pseudonym is a reference to his mentor in magic, the French magician Robert Houdin. While many suspected that his escapes were faked, Houdini presented himself as the scourge of fake spiritualists, pursuing a personal crusade to expose any kind of fraudulent methods. As president of the Society of American Magicians, he was keen to uphold professional standards and expose any frauds. He was also quick to sue anybody who imitated his escape stunts.